good founders, see other good founders, and you don't take advice from people who haven't made any things of substance, because there are a lot of counterintuitive things. There are a lot of things, the little decisions, if you don't do it correct, the company will have gone to zero. And I'm not saying I made all the right decisions. I am saying that there are certain things I just so believe in, even though I might be wrong, and even though I do make exceptions, but in totality, there's things that are just non-negotiable. Hello, welcome back to watching the Diaries of a Solo Founder. This is the year 2. And I call it the year 0 of me as a solo founder. So to set the stage, 2021 comes along, and I have been working on the startup part-time for about 8 months. And that's why I called that one year -1. And at this point, we have 0 customers. I have spent about $180,000 on development, hiring a few engineers from overseas, a couple designers, lots of people who are like just graduated from coding bootcamp, because that's the types of people I can hire. Some of them turn out to be really good. Some of them I filter out very quickly. At this point on my professional career, I was an engineering manager at a high-tech company. I was a staff engineer, and I also bought a bunch of single families in Seattle and bought a bunch of apartment complexes in Dallas, Texas. So at the beginning of 2021, I bought a 172-unit apartment complex with my business partner and a bunch of investors. We also bought a 408-unit apartment complex in Dallas, Texas. So at this point, you can say I did very well outside of the startup. So the first lesson in 2021 I had was, it felt like if you compare the state of the startup to everything else that I have done, it felt like I went back to the bottom of the hill. So I was quote unquote successful outside of the company at that time. And the startup had 0 customers, and I'm like negative $180,000 on the startup. So there's a part of me of asking, what am I doing? Like Q1 of 2021 was bad. Q2 is like even worse. Q3 is better, and then Q4 is really good. So at the time I was living that year, it was like 3 out of 5. At the time, now looking back at it, it's like 4 out of 5. Same thing I share with 2020, where when I was living in it, it's like 3 out of 5. And then now looking back at it, it's 4 out of 5. Now, about this going back to the bottom of the hill feeling, in 2020, I started actually a kind of a newsletter to the people that I know that are potential customers, because my first set of customers were folks from the mentorship group that were in multifamily. And so that's our target customers. So I sent out these newsletters every month. And I remember one of the newsletters, I was basically lamenting that juxtaposition between my other professional success and how the startup is going nowhere. So out of that letter, an investor actually sent me a very nice email saying that, Perry, I think you should focus on making the product applicable to raising money, because what you have done is to make it really good for post-money raise. Because I was working on things like being able to assign documents or all the K1s to the investors. I was working on the cap table logic. I was working on investment profile, but I was not working on the act of signing a document. That's where the most pain point happened. And I was like, aha, that's a really good point. So I went back to work on that. However, there was this feeling of me like, dang, why did I not work on the right thing? So that's the first lesson, which is it seems to be a pattern in my career that I always work on the thing that's not that important initially. And that makes the go-to-market super difficult, which results in 8 months later, we had 0 customers. Super weird, right? That is the thing I learned, and I kept making the same mistake later on in my entrepreneurial journey. The second thing is we hire a bunch of folks because of the COVID. A lot of people were doing layoffs, and a lot of fresh grads couldn't find jobs. So the second lesson there is about hiring. I will call it the coming of age story for myself, where I remember driving to Leavenworth, and in the car, I was telling my parents this story. So I'll share this story with you folks. There is one person that just graduated from a master's degree, and they couldn't find a job anywhere else. So they decided to take a chance with us as an intern. they were super passionate about the startup and make all kinds of statements like, I'll be so loyal to your company and I will never leave, but I want this kind of like hourly rate and so on. And initially I was like, this is a little bit weird already. Like, I don't believe that, but okay, like if you are passionate, go for it. Like, take a swing at it. They were doing well. They were not like bad. They're actually probably the most talented person in that batch. And then like a few months later, I noticed a slowdown because again, I'm very technical. So I know when people kind of quote unquote slack off. So I gave constructive feedback and say, hey, we expect this to be done this week. And I noticed that it did not get done this week. And then they were not happy about it, but they didn't exactly say anything during that one-on-one. And then 3 weeks later, they gave me a call. I remember I was in New York City at the time. And he said he want to go on a call. So I went on a call around like 7 p.m. Eastern time, 4 p.m. Pacific. And he said he is leaving. He's going to one of those big companies. I wish him good luck. And while walking down the streets of New York, I asked him, hey, is there any feedback that you want to give to me and the company? What could we have done to quote unquote keep you? And he said, there's one advice I want to give you, Perry, which is that you think of the company as a big passion of yours, but not all employees is not their startup. So they want to work kind of the best work-life balance, work the minimum amount and get paid the most. And that's how employees think. And that like when you gave me that feedback, I didn't feel very happy. So I started interviewing at that's when I had the idea of interviewing somewhere else. And so that's what he said to me. And I said, thank you so much for that and good luck to you. And then later on, he actually referred someone really good into the company. So let me tell you what I learned. I consider that the coming of age story. I have been in the industry for a long time at the time. I was 33 years old by 2021. And I know what's like to study lead code for big tech companies. They did not start interviewing at a big tech company the day I gave him feedback. They start studying a few weeks ahead of time. And that's probably why they were not very productive during the weeks in which I noticed. The feedback became the excuse that they wanted to go to another company. Like I was telling my parents, it's like, do they think I'm stupid? So that's the first lesson. But then the second, the fact that it's coming of age for me is that I did not say it. So in Chinese, it's like support it. In English, it's like I did not make a big deal out of it. And that's because I have a good 10, 12, 11 years ahead of them. So I know all the dilemmas that young folks were in. I was a young folk at some point. Telling white lies is not fine, but telling white lies is understandable. But I also at the same time saw some character flaw. In the name of a good reputation of the company, we ended very, very amicably. And then they even have a good feeling about the company that end up referring people. Later on, we actually came out to have dinner with a couple other interns, and they apparently were more interested in the car I drove than about the startup that I had. It was during that time I was telling my parents that I think I have matured, that I know what's the difference between what people say and the little things that people, where their values are at. Even like later on, I realized even if they're super nice to me, but if they show signs of character flaw, in my opinion, judged by my own character, I will index it. I may not take action on it, and I will not say anything until the time when it's necessary to say something. And then the third thing I also learned from that experience is they told me that employees are working for good work-life balance. And I told my parents explicitly that that is not the lesson I learned from it. I have learned that there exists a small set of startups that want people that will work their ass off, want people who are passionate about the mission, that will get these people to not need work-life balance in the initial years. I will not change the culture. In fact, I became more firm about the culture after he told me that. So it's very interesting. It's like I learned so many things from that one example. They gave me this feedback, But that's precise the feedback that affirmed my decision that this is not the type of person I want. In fact, I even generalize it to like, these are the type of people that came here for grad school, very materialistic, likes fancy cars, want to work the least amount to get the highest amount of pay, and their entire life will be a gradually incremental ascent in their career. They will not have any breakthrough. Now, I also know that because I'm 11, 12 years older, that there is a chance they will learn their lesson and come out of that mindset. But if that's the mindset forever, there's no way that they will become successful. That's how Ru, I think. Like, as you become like an entrepreneur and over time, there's a little bit of a hardened part of you of like, I've seen this pattern too often, too many times, and I can just tell if you're gonna make it or not. But sometimes people change. I still believe you are naive and young and that you can get out of this, but I can honestly say this is not a good mindset. So this is very different from when I was a kid, which is also like very hardworking and so on. He's very hardworking, but I don't suck up to people. I don't make all these promises. And the fourth lesson I learned is the people that tend to promise the most and say the most sugary things in the beginning of a job relationship tend to be the ones that don't end up doing all that well. The folks that were just like, yeah, prove it. Like, Perry, prove your company to me and I'll prove myself. The most kind of like steadfast, nonchalant, knowing that this is a working relationship, knowing this is still a ongoing interview, those people end up being spectacular later in the company. And this applies to my previous job and in my later job. So at my previous tech company, highest point, I was managing 12 people, and then I was managing managers. So in our current startup, we have like close to 30 people. And then there are like hundreds of customers and thousands of sales prospects. So the thing I have learned, probably the most important skill set, not a trait, but a skill set, is just like how to read and how to interpret what people say. So I belabor a lot of points on that, but 2021 is the year in which I felt I grew up, becoming more mature. The third thing I want to talk about on 2021 is about politics at work. So I worked at a big company. I learned a lot from the big company. I'm so thankful I still did part-time, on Casual Portal and then full-time at the other company, because that year is when I saw so much politics. And this is because maybe I became like, quote unquote, a more senior engineering manager, even though I never made it to that point. Engineer 2, but like engineering manager 2. But I know I was doing the work, and if I stay, I probably will have made it the following year or so on. So there are two main lessons that I learned in my last year in my corporate job that I will forever carry over to my startup. The first one is when a product is not sexy, every team wants to get rid of it. And so there was this one feature that I felt like our team didn't own, and no team wanted to own it. And it was not a big priority for the company. So I scheduled this call with like multiple engineering managers. And I said like, if a bug came up on this particular feature, who is the team that will fix it? And then there is like, it's followed by like 20, 30 minutes of platitudes. Everyone is saying all kinds of like shit that just like say that they don't want it. And I was like pretty frustrated. And I'm just like, who is going to fix the bugs? Then later on, I got the feedback that like, Perry, you need to think bigger. It's not about the bugs. I'm just like, and then later on, I heard like people will A/B test a bug fix to show their impact because that's what the performance review is based on. So that taught me like, I don't want my company to become like that. All of us in that room were not acting on the intention of what a true founder or CEO wanted us to do. But all of us were playing along the game. And I'm like frustrated about like, I just want a solution on who can fix the bugs. But I was not political enough. I was not savvy enough. I was not building good enough of a relationship with everyone that the truth doesn't win. That's when I learned the first big politics at work. The second politics at work that I learned was I was very adamant about doing a feature that I know is the future of the company. And I wrote a one pager. I gathered people, I worked on it. And then we worked on it for half a year. By the time I left, we were still working on it. The company didn't believe it. The company were like, oh, if we launch this, it's going to lose money. And if we launch this, we're the first one to do it, so we shouldn't do it. And then I'm like, this is just we are just not decisive enough to make a decision. What made me feel really good is that a couple years later, I think a year or two after I quit, our biggest competitor did it. And then immediately the entire company flipped. And then this is the most important project. And I felt really good at the time because I spent a year and a half trying to get the politics of that feature to work. And then a year and a half, the competitor did it. As soon as they did it, our company followed suit. And I was like, that's when I knew, I don't know everything about a company, but I know what our customers want. And it was so obvious. I also know, I was not leading a big company at the time. So I understand there's the PR, there's the relationship, there is a lot of stuff that I need to get right. And I did not have the power to do so. But it was the first example that I was right all along. And maybe that also mindset carried with me for the rest of my startup, which is at my previous company, I easily saw many things. Those are two very important. One is bugs are important. Please don't negotiate whose team owns it. If it's important, someone needs to make a decision on who owns it. And stop giving this kind of platitude of you don't come into this meeting with the right communication style. And then second is making a good decision, doing something that is obviously the long-term thing for the company to do, all things being equal, is just go do it as opposed to wait. It's a very interesting year. So that's the Q1 and Q2. And despite all of that, I still got exceeded expectation at work. So, I do everything else, but I knew that it was so easy. That whole launching the second product took us a year and a half. And then I remember after I left the company, the whole team was working on that project. And that's probably why the previous company, the coworkers, quote unquote, respect me, because by the time that became a big thing, I believe they tap into my team's engineers, and they're like, yeah, Perry had this idea all along. Again, I don't want to give too much credit to myself, but to me, it was a signal that I'm pretty good at making decisions that matter. That's why I call it year zero, because I haven't been full-time into the startup yet. And then the fourth thing I learned is about launching the product. So in 2021, we did another capital raise for a real estate syndication, and we raised about $7 million on that one. And before that, we raised about $4 million, and then another, $12 million, and then now it's a $7 million. And then the $12 million is not just me. There are 3 of the groups that total raise about $12 million. I raised $4 million out of that 12. And then this time 7, and then I raised 4 out of that 7. And, $7 million-ish. And remember at the beginning, I said we start working on the ability to sign documents directly within the portal. Before, it was I was doing everything after they raised the money, which did not create the urgency and the pain point for folks to want to use the product from the get-go. And that's a thing that I repeat all my life, which is I build the things that didn't matter, or it's not the very first thing they needed. But once they like the first thing they needed, later on, we build everything else already. So we almost built it in the wrong order. And it's a mistake because it's very lonely and painful for the first year and a half. But it means that we can keep the customers once we get them. So in August of 2021, we did the very first raise. And this is my own raise, because who is a better first customer than yourself? We had a couple small customers in April and March. And I remember those stories too, that they will sign up. And then a couple weeks later, they're like, hey, sorry, I really like you, but I need to go to another portal because you just don't have all the features. And I said, agree. And that's why good founders see other good founders, and you don't take advice from people who haven't made any things of substance, because there are a lot of counterintuitive things. There are a lot of things, the little decisions, if you don't do it correct, the company will have gone to zero. And I'm not saying I made all the right decisions. I am saying that there are certain things I just so believe in, even though I might be wrong, and even though I do make exceptions, but in totality, there's things that are just non-negotiable. One of which is I fixed the bug. Like, don't create a company where you have to A/B test a bug fix. Like, that's the stupidest thing I have ever heard. And then there's also like, going back to the politics thing, I also knew I don't want to create a company where like a bad company is nobody really brings the issue to the forefront. Everyone talks to everyone else. And then in the call, they will say, the CEO said we can do this. And then they're like, the VP of engineering said we can do this. And the VP of product said we do this. Like, everyone is like getting credibility from some other super up, but the super up never really said anything. The super up is always like talking about it during one-on-one. And so it's a lot of like he said, she said. And that the best ideas are through the best relationships, through the grapevine. And all the feedbacks are like almost suppressed. And so I see a little bit of that, like, not I see of a, like, even recently there's a new hire comes in, they want to build relationship with everyone, and they don't want to put the question up to the front. And I said, don't do that. I think the person that gives them feedback is meant to protect them, because yeah, you can bring stupid questions to the forefront, and that's also a no-no. But the wrong lesson is like not to bring anything to the forefront. The right lesson is still bring things to the forefront, but then like at least say that, hey, I have this idea, but it's not that urgent. So it's all the little things like that. I do not like it when people just like the spread of information is not transparent, and the spread of information is through a gossip protocol. Like, that's the worst kind of company communication. Now, let's talk about July and August. So that was the first launch. We partnered with a couple co-sponsors, and the co-sponsor ended up being an investor in the company, which is really, really good. And I told our co-sponsors, it's like, hey, I'm going to use my own software for the raise, but we're going to wait, like, give me another 48 hours so that we can launch this thing to the investors. And he's like, yeah, sure, no problem, and so on. And during that time, I was actually traveling to Miami for a conference. And so this is the fourth lesson, and the fourth thing that stood out to me in 2021. I spent less than, call it 2 hours at the conference. Even though I flew to Miami, I spent almost every minute of that conference in my hotel because our product wasn't ready. And thank God there was a hire that I did during that time. And they were from Seattle, and I used to joke that they saved the company. There were so many bugs in that investment funnel that if we were to launch it, we would have like never made it out of that thing. My co-sponsors, investors, like, this is not useful, right? So we could have died before we even did anything. And I'm so thankful. And at the same time, I indexed it that the people we've hired from the Philippines were not good enough to solve those problems. And even though like many years later, the person that I dubbed the generational hire that saved the company, that I did not know that I saved the company. I was just doing my job. The same way that when I was at my previous company, I just did my job, and apparently my impact were very, very impactful. And so, I'm forever grateful. So there are things in which like I knew that like, hey, people are not going to work out. And then there are things in which when really good things happen, I'm just lucky. Like, thank goodness the universe somehow gives me a hand by sending such a good person into my life and help save the company, because I know the consequences when that deal did not have a good, smooth experience. And then also in Miami, I will have work comp. Like, I literally like test every single combination that could have gone wrong. And I also know all the combinations that like I know there's a bug, but it's not the biggest thing. And I also let a couple small investors, my most trusted investors, go through the funnel first. They report a couple more bugs and then they fix it. So it was like a very interesting first raise. And the feedback afterwards is like, yeah, this is really smooth. Like last year, we used actually a different software for our raise. And then 2021, we use my software. And the investors like, wow, this software is actually easier to use than last year's. Again, at this point, I still have a W-2 job. At this point, I have been working on it part-time. At this point, I spend about close to 400, 500K on the startup. And so even though I didn't have any traction at the beginning of the year, I should double down. That's actually another lesson. And I was like, that company was like valued at $1.5 billion. And here I am doing this as a part-time job. And if it's good enough, then I should probably do something about it. And that's where the inkling is to quit my job. Thank goodness it's those little pivotal moments that somehow we got through it and then we survive. Because if we didn't survive, then the co-sponsor will be like, what the hell? This is like you told me you're gonna use your software and this is like not even working. Later, the co-sponsor told me that they didn't know this is my first race. Or they think they know this is my first race, but they didn't know how shaky the ground was. I'm like, yeah, like that's the definition of assembling a parachute on the way down. But we got through it. In those days, you just have to pull all-nighters if you need to. And I'm so thankful. That's where kind of the US-based, the type of engineers I always want to hire finally came into play. And you have to go through that journey of hiring people that were like okay, but good enough for the first version, and then you hire. So this is a very different approach than someone say, we're gonna hire all the MIT grads and the Stanford grads, and then we're gonna raise a bunch of money from VC firms. That's the fourth lesson, which is a generational hire. And then the fifth thing that stood out to me is we barely have any competitors, and we hire some folks from like Upwork. And one of the competitors reach out to one of those people we hire on Upwork and say, Perry is still working at a corporate job. He is going to run into HR trouble by starting this new company. And in case the company dies, you should work for us. So they're poaching our employees and basically bad-mouthing us. And here I am. I had 0 customers. That's when I saw like, holy cow, this is what that's like. It's crazy. I was rejected by customers. I was like rudely giving a lecture by customers that like, hey, with my 25 years of experience, like, let me tell you, you can over negotiate yourself, which is good advice, the literal sense. In some sense, a cease or desist by our competitor. And then the employees don't think we are anything big. So that's 2021. The generational hire saved us. But September 2021, I quit my job. I was taking a 1-month sabbatical, and then afterwards, I quit my job. That was really good. And then October, we got into Y Combinator. And so because at that time, I knew that I needed to quit. So that's actually brings me to the 6th lesson. So I would do a completely different video on YC. Like to some of you, like YC is awesome and like, yeah, it is awesome. But like, honestly, like, do I check the YC forums like every day? No, hell no. Like I check it like every 6 months. Like it's not something I think about every day, but I'm sure a lot of you who haven't gotten into it that like feel like it's something magical and special. It is. It taught me a lot, and which I can do a different video on it. But yeah, like suffice to say, we got into YC. But getting into YC is almost like a derivative of how good you are. Like if you're good, you just will get in if you want to apply. Let me talk about the 6th lesson. So the 6th lesson is around April, I think, or March, I was contemplating whether I should quit my job. And at this point, we have still like basically 0 customers. We have one like couple pilots, they're paying like $100 a month or whatever. And they still became our customers later on, which I'm very forever grateful for. And I was going on a dinner with one of my best friends, and I confide to him that like, should I continue to run this as a side because it's not going anywhere? We have 0 customers. We have 0 revenue, basically. I don't see how this could become ever big, but there's something also about it that I feel like we are making progress, and I feel like it has legs, and we are talking to customers and people start to like us a little bit more, and they will sign up if we do XYZ. But then I was like, I'm afraid that I'm making quite a lot, and if I quit my job, then I don't have a backup. I know I could go back and get a job, but there's a lot of fear of going through the hurdle of quitting my job. And he said something, very wise statement that he said that like, when your back is against the wall, that's when you did the best work. And I'm like, yeah, you are right. The last few years until 2021, I had a very, very good job. But before that, I had quite a bit of tribulations in my life. And when my back was indeed against the wall, I made something out of it. And I never really put myself where my back was against the wall and I'm gonna give it a shot. So that was the reason that led me to quit my job. Now that I'm saying it, the next few years, my back was indeed against the wall, and I indeed made the best out of it. So that statement has turned out to be true. So thankful for someone who can almost simulate what I'm likely to do. Usually the bystander is able to play that simulation more objectively than I do the simulation myself. And so I'm thankful for that. And there was also even like almost a silly question I had at the time, which is not asking him, but asking someone else that like, right now, I'm pretty chill in the sense that like I have a full-time job and I'm doing product, I'm doing some demos, and it's just going, and in order to do all these things, we need to build the product. And I don't feel like doing any marketing. I don't feel like if I quit my job, I have anything to do because I need to wait for the product to be built. And I want to keep doing this almost indefinitely. Basically wait a couple more years. And I like, is there any actual work for me to do if I quit my job? Like, how do I fill in the time? And he's like, I never heard of this question before. Like, this is such a stupid question. No founder ever say, oh, they have too much time in their hands in the first years. You're gonna find stuff to do. Even when your engineers are coding, you will work on go-to-market, you work on marketing, you work on a bunch of things. You will find enough work and more to fill up your time. And that also turned out to be true. So year 0, September is when we were incorporated, and October-ish is when we got into YC. And then 2022, the following year, is the year we graduated from YC. And that, according to a lot of people, is the official start of our company. So thanks for watching the year 0. The year -1 and year 0 are the foundational years of the startup. And that's where I learned a lot of things that till this day, I still believe to be true. And in some ways, it heartened me. In some ways, it also made me very grateful for the things that do pan out. And in some ways, I also know like the importance of these pivotal moments that if they did not go well, you can call it the rest is not history. And if they did well, the rest is history. So thank you so much for watching. Have a good one. Bye.